So I'm gonna do pattern for a moment here. Actually, no, I'm gonna launch right in once you have that set. Okay, so we could just go to the first slide. So, oh my gosh, it's hard to remember back to this moment over 10 years ago, but like everyone, like all the other artists in New York City, I was in my studio listening to NPR, and I heard this very random thing. It sounds like someone said there was a protest down in Wall Street, and I was like, what? And my first thought was, okay, I gotta find out. So I emailed a friend who lived in Tribeca and said, what's going on in your neighborhood? They were like, I don't know, we're out of town, see you soon. It's like, okay. So in the end, it took me a week to get down there. I didn't even know what I was going to find, but I heard other reports. There was like people getting pepper sprayed. It was just like, I was just dumbfounded. So I hopped on the train, and they said it was in Wall Street, so I thought, I'm going to take the number 2 train to the Wall Street stop. Just going to go right to where it's supposed to be. And I thought if it's a real protest, you know, I grew up in the 60s, I know what protests look like, I know what they sound like, you can hear them. So I thought, well, I'll just listen for it. And I got out of the train, and I listened really hard. I heard something. It wasn't close, but I followed the sound, and it led me to Zuccotti Park, where I made this image. Can you do the next one, please? And I was bowled over by what I found. You know, having grown up in the 60s and the 70s, you know, there was all this social progress that had been made that had been entirely undone in the subsequent years under Reagan and the Bushes. And I was bummed. It was really sad because, you know, I got diminished during those years. I was just, you know, it wasn't black as beautiful. Black men were bucks and black women were well. It just, you know, kind of went downhill from there. But I knew political pendulums swing back. And I thought, okay, next slide, please. Who knows where the world is going to be when that happens? Who knows who I'm going to be? I could have made some really weird political flip-flop and become like some right-wing zealot. I didn't know it happens. But I got to Zuccotti Park, and it was like, holy cow. Like, this is the pendulum swinging back, and it's swinging back in my hometown, and I'm here. So I thought, I've got to photograph this. Next slide, please. And I came back the next day with a camera that's like totally unwieldy. It's a view camera. It's like, for those who aren't initiated, it's on a tripod. My camera's made of wood. It's got that accordion bellows thing. I've got a hood over my head. Yeah, it's like that. You would think, why would you use something so weird? Well, because it gives you a lot of information. So, you know, we often speak of megapixels with images. Well, if I were to scan that at its max, you get gigapixels. And you get them at a cost that's way cheaper than you could do ever with digital. So that was the reason I chose it, because I needed to see this as clearly as possible. This is a woman, all of you will talk about her. Yeah, she was with CBS, and they all just say, I was sure when I got down there that I was only going to be there for 2 weeks. You know, it felt, I wasn't sure because I'm not a mind reader, but I was pretty sure this was important. It felt like it was important at the moment. And I thought, well, you know, all those brilliant photojournalists from all over the country and all over the world, they'll hear about this, and they'll come, and I'll see them, and I'll be superfluous because they know much more about doing this than I do. My work up to this point had have been like Lynne's, experimental. But like most artists in this country, I've got a lot of training. I know how to do all the traditional stuff too. And when I got to Occupy, that's all it needed. Didn't need an experimental kind of approach. I just needed to see clearly. But I waited. And I waited. And all of those brilliant photojournalists didn't arrive. The first person who I saw from the press was a crew from MTV. And they were doing a story. On all the hot, young, straight guys who were single and available in the park. Right? Yeah, that was the story that day. Now you can give MTV kind of a soft pass, you know, they're entertainment news, though they do know how to do hard news. But this was Paula Reed, who's now with CNN, and she was with CBS, the local affiliate then. And her story that day was on shipping pallets. So here in the background you can see a tent. They had started pitching tents at this point in the protest. And instead of putting the tents on the incredibly hard and cold granite, which is what the park is surfaced with, they put them on the shipping pallets. A layer of warm air you can clean underneath, keep everything tight. So Paula that day was doing a story on shipping pallets, not on income inequality, not on politics in America, because people needed to know what shipping pallets were. I don't want to say the F word, but you know what the F word is. Almost said it there. And that wasn't so funny. That really wasn't so funny. And this is not to show any disrespect to Paula Reed. I know she's very intelligent because no one gets to be where she is without being smart as hell. It was kind of a systemic thing that probably came from her assignment editor. But even then, it's like there was a total breakdown because everyone seemed to be missing the story. And it made me have to stay. I didn't get a chance to leave because the images I was making, I wasn't seeing anywhere else. And I was like, gee whiz. I hadn't bargained on that, but it seemed that if no one else was going to make the images, I couldn't shirk that responsibility. I had to continue, so I continued for about a year. And so that's kind of the basic intro I'd like to give. So at this point, I'd like you to bring up and welcome Lynne Sachs, my good friend, and we can continue the conversation.
Oh gosh, what an honor to be here. I had the joy of listening to Accra tell many stories, and as you can hear, he is such a good raconteur. And I made a film called Tip of My Tongue, and he is one of the featured people in the film, and that's actually how we met about 6 years ago. And he tells stories about Occupy Wall Street. He also tells stories about, not about Martin Luther King's assassination, but about his perception of that time as a 6-year-old. He tells stories about 9/11, many others. So it was really an honor to work with him on that. And actually for the next few weeks, the film is available for free on my Vimeo, so you can hear many other stories from Accra and other people. So I wanted to start with this idea that to me is quite cinematic. And it's the idea that the first time you engaged with this place that had just probably gotten a name, which was Occupy Wall Street, or we probably didn't even have that name the first day.
No.
Yeah, I wonder how, I actually would like to go back to the gestation of that, the name. But why was it important to you to hear it first? What do you think, I mean, you probably had a phone or you had a little camera, but you wanted an oral experience first.
Well, I just didn't know where it was, and sound has that ability it doesn't travel along sight lines, it goes around things.
That's beautifully put.
Yeah.
That it's 360 degrees.
And so, you know, it's funny, someone who I studied with years ago spoke about the possibilities that we have with vision because we are such visual creatures, the possibilities with sound. And that's something that sight cannot do, because it is literally, there's the expression line of sight, and if there's something in the way, it becomes invisible. Josie, could you go to image number 7, please?
Okay. Yeah.
Because that kind of channels the 60s, those
It
kids.
definitely does. The way their bodies connect
Yeah.
and lay across each other.
They drove up from the new college in Florida.
Oh, I know a lot of, I've heard a lot about that school.
Oh, they're real lefties down there.
Just that one school,
It's a little
that one
island.
school is a bastion. Yeah, and then they copped up here. Okay, I want to go on and explore perception with you. One of the things I noticed in the images was that you create this sort of uncanny precision that circulates around, do you call them your subjects? Around
Yeah.
the people, are you okay with subjects?
Subjects, the people I photographed, yeah.
The people you, yeah. Because in the world of documentary, it's always problematic what you call the people in your work. So we'll say subjects here. But then you allow for what we call, in photography, we call a shallow depth of field, sometimes, not in all of the images. And I was very excited by the way that sort of gave a kind of gravitas to your subjects. And it's a subtle shift between, and maybe there's an image you could choose that has like sort of that shallow, the softness in the back.
Well, that would be image number 2, if you could jump to there. And this is Mickey with the sign that everyone loves. In fact, during the protest, everyone loved this sign. Evidently, it was kind of an unofficial slogan. And in the background, soft, as Lynne said, it says, "A better world is possible," which kind of recalls Voltaire's Candide, where his hypothetical philosopher, Law, says, "This is the best of all possible worlds." Of course, Voltaire thought that was probably not true. And so it kind of creates this tension.
Here,
Yeah.
it's brilliant. And you know what I have to say? Because I hadn't noticed the text behind.
I didn't notice it for like months until after I saw it. So,
right.
yeah, so, I mean, I was focused on Mickey and trying to be as clear as possible and work as honorably and as quickly as I could. There's all this stress that kind of, you know this, when you're working with people in the field, you feel, oh my gosh, I'm taking their time, and they're being so kind and generous, and I'm so slow.
Actually, I think now that I'm getting a chance to study this image more, I see, to me, it sort of goes from the black to the white to the grays in terms of your work, because the top third is very much in the spirit of some of your other work where you're working with abstraction and with nature. But you allow that to come in, but it's still serving what's in the foreground. So there's an interesting energy that reminds me of other kinds of ways of working.
No, I love that. I love that. Yeah, no, I hadn't thought about my experimental landscape work kind of drifting in, but that makes perfect sense, and I can see how you would make that illusion. That's beautiful. Thank you.
Cool.
Can I ask, are there that many trees behind it, or is that a function of the focus?
No, there were a lot of trees there. They're spindly little things.
Yeah.
They will probably not grow much more than that. There's almost no light in the book.
Yeah.
I mean, save if they put giant mirrors on top of all the buildings to reflect sunlight down, that's kind of thing.
Okay. Okay, this is something that we all have to wonder, I think. What's your process of engaging these people such that they're willing to stand, and how long do they stand waiting for you to get set up? And what is like
Can you go to
the
image number
arrangement?
10, please? Yeah, so we'll talk about this. So this is Sue and Kyle, and Sue is from Queens, and Kyle at this time had been kicked out of his home and was couch surfing. They were an item for several years. When I did the 5-year follow-up for the New York Times, they were no longer an item, but they were still friends. Sue was working, doing volunteer work with a group called, I think it's the Plowshares, out of Boston, and they're all, turn the bombs and Plowshares.
I made movies with them.
Oh, excellent.
On the Catonsville Mines.
Oh, that's so
Yeah,
amazing.
So they're definitely plowshares.
Yeah.
People, yeah.
So,
Peace, beyond peace activism.
well, she was helping cook meals for the homeless in the parks.
Yeah.
And she was thinking about studying law, but at this time, she was just a high school student like Kyle. And in terms of process, I would look around to see people who seemed, this is the hard part, genuine, who seemed present. There were lots of people wearing really wild costumes, people with really amazing signs. Just, you could feel their need for attention just kind of like coming out in waves. And it kind of made me afraid, in the way that, did you get enough love as a child? Are you like looking for it from me? And I was like, okay, maybe we don't need to like invest time in this kind of relationship. I need to see people who are present in a more integrated way. And so, I know it's so squishy and weird sounding, and it sounds that way to me too, and I'll get there, but I'll look around and it's like, oh yes, this person, not that person, you just know. Anyway, so I saw Sue and Kyle, they were brilliant, both with their beautiful long hair, again kind of making us think of another moment, not necessarily, 2008, this was 2011, 2008 was the economic crash that led to this. And so I have my view camera, I have everything loaded and ready to go. And it takes about 15 minutes to get everything ready. So
That's what people probably are.
But
aware of.
I have on my side that I'm working with this camera that looks really cool and
Yes.
weird at the same time. So while I'm setting it up, it's like a little photo tutorial. Sometimes you're curious and they'll ask questions. And like I kind of split my brain, so I'm focusing on making sure everything is right so I don't mess up. And engage them because I want them to be who they are, because I'm very close to them with a big camera. I don't want them to feel...
Like how far away are you?
Maybe about like this distance.
Oh.
And I'm like this on my knees, the camera's here, because no one is 6'7", and I don't want to be looking down at them, and I want to be looking straight at them. So I had like a piece of cardboard that I could put my knees on, because it felt like my knees I need to keep good. And the big thing was the permission, and it was pretty simple. I would say, hey, do you mind if I could make a photograph of you? And the follow-up would be, what is this for? And I would say, well, I'm an artist, and the work might appear in galleries, perhaps publications, but I can't know that. And they mostly said yes. Sometimes they didn't even ask what was it for, because when you are demonstrating, it's kind of like a performance, in the way that, I don't know if any of you have stood up in public and demonstrated, but you feel really, really exposed. Maybe kind of like you're naked in public almost, like that kind of exposed. Like people are looking at me. They're like hearing the words come out. And they're strangers and they might be judging me. I mean, it's just like all of these thoughts kind of like flood in your head. At the same time, you disregard them. And I kind of complete that process because it's about being seen, it's about being heard. And I kind of that's what I do. I see officially, I make the official, I don't know, it sounds silly, it's not really official, but you know, it's like as close as you can get to the idea of official version of seeing something. And you were there too. You were doing the same thing.
Yeah, it was. And with an old I was shooting with a 16mm camera, so that got a lot of conversation going. I actually didn't know Accra that year, but I found he's in some of my shots.
Oh, did you find me?
Yeah, I
Oh
found
my
like
gosh.
a little, like just a hovering about everybody else, but yes.
No, that's so funny because I guess we were both so focused on trying to see people. I mean, I did see other photographers, but only the ones that were kind of like in my immediate view.
But it's interesting, we both chose these cameras that were sort of so cumbersome. I had a wind-up camera.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but I think I knew this was something that I needed to shoot on film, and we knew that it was.
And 16mm is the biggest you can get, and without needing a crew.
Yeah, for sure. So one more, so you mentioned that you did a piece for the New York Times and that there was a follow-up 5 years later. Any surprises 5 years later?
Well, the biggest surprise was that it came out in the New York Times because
That's surprising.
now I want to say this delicately because the Times has been very kind to me, and I'm very close to my editor at the Sunday Review, who has been wonderful. But I remember reporting from all the papers, not just the New York Times, and the narrative that I saw unfolding in front of my camera was not what I saw reflected in any, not just the New York Times, but any of the media, print, broadcast, social media was emergent at that moment, so it wasn't really a vector of news. It wasn't that Occupy was ignored. That was not the case at all. And we just, as we have this slide up for a long time. Can you jump to 12, please? Thank you. It wasn't that Occupy was ignored. They definitely did pieces on it. Oh, there were, you know, people were beaten up, and there was one protest here, another there. But there was no sustained through line. If you could jump back to image number 8, please. So on this woman's beautiful cable knit sweater, I love this peasant skirt again. It says ban fracking now. And so the press was really confused by messages, the fact that there's no spokesperson, there's no dedicated press liaison, no press releases. Very unprofessional. Proudly, yeah. So by now we've all heard about the horizontal political structure of Occupy. There's no leaders, everyone. So when you got to Occupy, if any of you were there, and you were there more than one day, people might ask, like, oh, what are you interested in? Or you might find the people who are doing something you are interested in, say like environmental sustainability or literacy or racial justice or economic inequality, all these different things. Access to broadband. I mean, there were all these ideas that people were working on. There were these things called working groups. And you could join them, and you could speak. There were rules, and everyone participated, and you could wind up being a very important person. I could have done that, but I was like, that's not how it works. I just needed to see what was going on. And so this young woman has on her sweater band fracking now. And so nominally, Occupy Wall Street was about economic inequality. And the press and other people people who were reading the accounts of the press might openly wonder, what on earth does fracking have to do with economic inequality? And the problem is that the issues that were being discussed during Occupy, that are being discussed now, are not sound bites. And that's the unit of information that works just in the broadcast or social media outlets, but also the printed press. They want something brief. I think I looked up online that a soundbite was like 24 seconds. That might even be long, because that's almost half a minute. So, coming back to this image, the way we have structured our economy, farmers are not fully supported. And you might think, oh, but we have farm bills. That supports agribusiness. If you look it up, there are these people, Archers, Daniel Midland, Conagra, they write contracts that, if they pay for themselves, with these people we call farmers. The farmers are barely scraping by. And in places like upstate New York and rural Pennsylvania, and all the places where you've heard about fracking, they are in big stand because they're ready to just pack it in. The only problem is they don't have anything else they can do. They're like between a rock and a hard place. And so into this situation that is totally structured because of tax laws and other things that come out of government. It's not like they planned wrong, they were bad farmers. This is just the way everything is structured in the economy. Into this situation, the representatives of the petrochemical industry say, hey, here's cash on hand. If we could lease your land to do this cool thing. They're not getting any money to buy seed or insurance for the vehicles or fertilizer. And even if they did know that the potential for poisoning the groundwater was there, even if they did know that injecting water at such high pressure would destabilize the geologic plates that cause earthquakes, I know, it's like really weird, like real, honest-to-God earthquakes where you never had earthquakes before. Like forms, like things that'll shake your china and stuff. Even if they knew that, even if they had the energy to look that up, they probably would have signed these contracts anyway because it's like there was no other source of income. And this is a story of economic inequality in one of its most naked, visible forms, but it's not a soundbite. It is definitely not a soundbite. And that was a big struggle for the media. So when you asked, going back to your original question, what was my biggest kind of surprise, was getting to tell that story in the New York Times 5 years later. I had to work hard. My editor, who was a woman of color actually, kept trying to cut out all the linkages, all the political stuff. It was like, no. That's the whole point.
Yes, and that was a perfect explanation, and now it definitely leads her into that skirt, leads her right in. I wanted to ask one more question, and then I wanted to let you all ask questions. So, you spent a lot of time looking at these people, but they spent time looking at you. How was that? They're looking each time, because these are portraits, so, and most of them are looking directly back at the camera. And I think, I have a feeling you didn't say to them, oh, I want you to look 3/4 off, or this or that. You wanted them to look into the lens, but they're also looking at you.
Could you go to image 24, please? Yeah. So, one of the people whose work I really love is a German photographer named August Sander. And August Sander, he had this idea to photograph all of the German people. He lived during the Edwardian period, just before the Nazis came to power. And so, in true Downton Abbey fashion, it was a highly stratified kind of society. You would think, oh, farmers. The farmer would wear a suit and tie and nice black shoes. There were like 7 layers underneath the farmer that would get you down to the field hand, perhaps. So it's that kind of stratification. Born into that class, you stayed in that class. So there was no kind of mobility. And so this was the world that August Sander was photographing. But it was one that was rapidly set up for change. You could kind of feel that coming. The Bauhaus had been established, and things were really on the move. And the Edwardian era was ready to just break open and become this new thing that was like more connected to where we are now. And photographed people from head to toe, and I liked that. And the people were really engaging with the camera, and I wanted them to look right at the lens, looking at me, looking at you, the audience. And it was weird for the person I was photographing to look at this piece of glass, because I was talking to them, the glass wasn't. But I know that was the vehicle, that was going to be the way that they were going to be able to engage with the viewer most directly to create that relationship. This, by the way, was in the spring of 2012, after people had been kicked out of the park. It was in April, and could you go to 27, please? This is end of May, beginning of June. A group of kids from Yorktown Prep, nice private school in Manhattan. These 3 guys with like 8 of their friends had just come down after school to see what was going on. I guess they'd heard about it. And I spoke with them, and yeah, their dads were, none of these kids were 1%ers that I could tell, like 10%ers, maybe 5%ers. You know, they were up there, but they weren't like, you know. And they were really interested in learning. And you saw this even with the bankers who worked around there. Early on in the protest, I saw conversations with bankers and protesters. It was fascinating. But yeah, so.
That's true. They're also listening probably to you. And I hadn't even thought about that, but there's a way that you keep their, I feel that they're thinking. That's one of the things I really loved about the images. Sometimes when people catch a subject, you know, looking off, like not aware of the camera, there's not that energy. And with these, you feel like there's this arrow or something going back.
You know, it's fascinating. I wonder about that too sometimes. And I think it's because people knew when they were at this thing, at this protest, even casually, not so casual, but just visiting for the day, they knew that this was real. And I did talk to them, but it was mostly to ask them questions and hear about who they were. Because one of the things that I did when I photographed, if you go to 28, which takes us away from Occupy to the next one, but I was interested in the individuals. I wanted to know who these people were. So normally at these protests, there's this sense of like, we need to see the huddled masses yearning to breathe free. And how can you know a huddled mass? What can you tell from that, you know? But I do know people, and I like talking to people. And I was fascinated about where all these people had come from. We saw the group from Florida. There were people, there was a guy, a stockbroker from Estonia, someone from Arkansas. Like, they were coming from everywhere. Who were these people? And the photographs allowed me to share with you exactly who they are. This woman, I photographed her in the protest in 2020. This is part of a larger project called the COVID Journals. And they're chapters. So like the first one is contagion and then hunger, when that was a big issue, still is, hasn't gone away, but you know, when it was present for us during the pandemic. And this was the justice chapter, and it's kind of the last bit of the book, acts as a coda, because so many of the ideas that were explored during Occupy kind of came back around to bite us in the rear end 10 years ago. And unlike Occupy, I didn't have the social, cultural permission to ask people for their names. You know, the editors who became interested in my work when I was photographing Occupy, they were like horrified. You didn't get people's names? What kind of photographer are you? It was like, I don't do this work, I'm just moonlighting, guys. Anyway, so by this time, I kind of knew the drill, but the world had shifted in 10 years. And privacy has always been a thing, but now it was like a really big thing. And what I would do is I would share my Instagram handle with people. And they might follow me, and I could see their Instagram handle back, and I could make a note, DM them if I was really clever. I missed a few people, but mostly sometimes they would message me back, and I would get to know them. This woman, I found out much later after the fact, her name is Andrea. She's absolutely brilliant. This is the 150th day of Breonna Taylor's murderer not being charged. She's with him, so it's just like, still not charged. So I learned from my half-sister who did a documentary for the New York Times on this topic that the Attorney General of Louisville, who's in charge of this investigation, is a protege of our good friend Mitch McConnell, who has America's best interest at heart always. And as a black man, seemingly in the model of Clarence Thomas, he is so concerned with the rights of everyone except black people. And he doesn't see a problem with the fact that a civil servant, an EMS worker, was shot in cold blood in her bed for nothing other than sleeping because, well, we think it was an error. Her ex-boyfriend was someone of interest, and so she dies. I mean, there's just so many questions that this raises, and it's not difficult to do an honest investigation. And clearly, you know, if you don't want more people to die, it needs to result in change. But that's not going to happen. Not now, at least. I don't think that it will never happen. But you know, we're a couple of years out. So anyway, so coming up to this point, I was scared like everyone else. This was different from mine because I didn't think I had permission to photograph during the protests. Here, jump to one more image before we go on. So let's go to image 30, please. But after a week, you know, George Floyd was murdered around Memorial Day of 2020. And like everyone else here in the room, I was like, oh my God, this is just crazy. I couldn't imagine the world that we had become. I mean, I knew it was bad, but I had never thought that people would collectively just say no like that with so much force. And then I realized, oh my gosh, there's a pandemic going on still. This is happening in spite of the pandemic. So I thought, okay, so this is part of the pandemic. I have a photograph too. So I put on my mask and went out to go to the protests. And that was kind of my life.
I can tell you that we talked on the phone a lot. Some of you also know Accra. Even at the beginning of the pandemic, and Accra was at Elmhurst Hospital. It was the courage you had during even the early months of the pandemic.
Well, that's all.
Daunting.
All I did, I figured I'd used up all my free passes. There was no socializing because every time you went out, it risked getting COVID. So I thought, well, I'm risking it going to photograph, so I'm just going to go home and develop my film. That's it. That's all I do.
Do you have?
I guess so.
We want to open it up for questions.
Yes, please.
Did anyone ever take pictures of you taking pictures?
Oh yeah, especially during Occupy when I had the view camera. They were really interested in that. And I have a folder on my computer with that. A few people during the justice protest, they did too, but they didn't email me back pictures. It was mostly a situation where they were young image makers posting on Instagram a lot, and I was working with a twin lens reflex, which looks fun, and it makes the kind of negative that I like. Yeah.
Other questions? The background. Oh, okay, we'll start here.
How did you find the people 5 years later?
Oh, I had relationships with them. So I had thought at one point to do a whole new photographic project, finding as many people as I could. And when I looked up all of my contact information, I made about 400 odd negatives, and I had contact information for about a third of those people, so maybe 125 people. So when the New York Times became interested in doing the 5-year follow-up, I wanted to travel around the country, around the world, getting to these people again, but they were like, not on our budget. So it was just local people, that's what I did.
Yes, in the back.
A little bit piggybacking off of the 5-year photo essay. I was thinking about the different
Speed trap
kinds.
reported ahead.
Oh my gosh, now we are safe.
Sorry.
The different kinds of engagement that the viewer and the subject have with one another. In this way, it's this very human to human kind of connection. And there's information about the subjects in the 5 years later essay that provides sort of stats and facts. I mean, I remember one of them is a kid holding a dreamer sign, and I believe that in the Times
Image
essay.
21, please.
Oh, good. Feel it right up. I think that the Times essay said that at the time this photo was taken, that she was undocumented.
Yes.
And that's not something you know you think about when you see it, but I'm just wondering about the different ways we connect and relate, like from person to person, or you know, you can tick these boxes of, oh, now I can relate this to that particular experience that essay afforded that's so different than what you can capture in the midst of a pandemic.
Yeah, you know, all of the images have backstories. And maybe that's part of what me looking into the crowd and deciding who I need to photograph. And what I'm seeing are these visual cues about these very backstories that I cannot possibly know. So when I caught up with Yahira, Yahira is Mixtec. I think she came, I always get her age wrong. It's like 4 or 5 years old. She came to the US with her folks. And she and her brother Marcos had opened a restaurant in the Tremont section. Was it the Tremont section? No. I'm forgetting which section of the Bronx they opened it up in. But it was a hot restaurant. Oh my God. Like, when I say hot, like all the hipsters were in this restaurant because it was like really good indigenous food from the Mixtec region. And all the workers were undocumented people. And there was a library in the back of the restaurant filled with resources for the undocumented who could come in and learn about what resources were available to help them, you know, navigate the legal system. And I'm pretty sure that this was a number of years ago, so she may have finished law school. That, I think, was her next stop. So Marcos, her brother, stayed with the restaurant. She went on, I think, to go to law school. I mean, I assume so. So this was 2012. No, this is 2011, December of 2011. And I guess the Dreamers Act was still maybe a year or two away. So she qualified for that once it was enacted. So both her brother have the quasi-legal status that act conferred upon them. But yeah, so coming back to this idea about all of these issues that we feel are so topical. You know, it's like, for lack of a better way of expressing it, it's like, oh my gosh, it's so very up to the minute. Like, how did you know? How, you know, it's like, and now it's 5 years out, you know, you're coming back, and, well, that was the nature of the beast. Occupy actually ticked all those boxes because that was its focus. It was very broad. In the book, in my essay, there's this graphic by a brilliant graphic artist by the name of Rachel Schreves. And it's this incredible Venn diagram on steroids, whereas looping lines and this hand drawn is beautiful. And you know, look at it carefully, because what it does is it connects all the ideas that wove through Occupy. And it explained visually the connectedness of all of these ideas. And I love that about it. And I love that I saw it recently as a new acquisition at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And I was like, yeah, Rachel, you go. It was
Oh,
fantastic.
that is amazing.
And I didn't get to meet Rachel during the protest, but there was another graphic artist, Julie, who I did meet. She's now doing work in Vietnam, actually. Many of these people during Occupy didn't just stop with Occupy. It was kind of like boot camp, kind of like training to become, well, you know, in the old days, when I say the old days, I mean way before I was born, like when I'm actually, you know, when politicians would speak about American people, they would call us citizens. Then we became fellow Americans. And then we became taxpayers. Because it's all about the money, isn't it? And that's obviously part of the problem. Occupy brings us back to the idea of being citizens. And as such, there's a lot that kind of goes into that. It touches a lot of different things. And so I think that's partly why it lent itself so easily to that. Oh, are you going to go find Rachel's image in here?
No, I'm just gonna hold the book so that
Okay.
people see it.
Okay. Yes, please.
So I came in a little bit late, but going forward, are you two working collaboratively on any projects, or is?
Oh,
Right.
maybe. It would be
Yeah.
fun. I don't know.
We did for several years because Accra was in my film. But I did not work on this book. I wish I had. Yeah. Yes.
You don't have to have an answer to this, but do you see like what is the sort of, do you have a sense of the stories or story that connect the two periods in the photographing? You know, this is a period where there's no masks, obviously, for example, right? It's a period before Trump, for example. The other question I have is just, what's been the museum reaction to this? Like, how do you see the work received compared to your other work in the kind of artistic world?
Both excellent questions. Can you go to image 23, please? And then 35. So that first image was Barbara at Occupy. She was not quite an immigrant, originally from Iowa, but here in New York for many, many years. And this is an unidentified couple because, as with most of the people during the protest, I didn't get their names. The through line, unfinished business. So I spoke about how this was like boot camp. Let's jump back to an image from Occupy, early image. That would be number 9, please. So Charlie from Arkansas, he had ditched his senior year of college. He was going to get a philosophy degree. But he didn't really want to study philosophy. He wanted to study engineering. But that was the closest he could get at his public university. He did finish and get an engineering degree here in New York City at the Institute of Technology. But in between finishing that degree and Occupy, he tried to bring broadband, free broadband to Brooklyn, and then went out with a group out to the Midwest to try to bring free broadband to communities out there. It just didn't stop with Occupy. It just echoed out. And so I'm forgetting the name of the woman who coined the term Black Lives Matter. But when that movement began, in 2014, I believe, when Michael, what's his name is going to be right now.
St. Louis?
Yes, the St. Louis Ferguson. Michael Brown was murdered. The vacuum that might have existed where people were just shocked and horrified, it didn't stay very long. That vacuum sucked in all these people, and they knew exactly what to do. Because as in New York City, people had participated in Occupy all over the country. They knew the drill, and they knew what this was about, and they knew exactly how it was connected to everything else because they'd gone through everything before. And so racial justice is connected to economic inequality, is connected to environmental justice, is connected to everything. Because it's about being a citizen, knowing how things work, and asking for things to work better. And that's not something, I don't know if the Fourth Estate remembers that so well, because we went through this period in the 80s when we decided that we were going to have this thing called infotainment. It's an old word that no one uses anymore. But that's kind of where things stayed. Entertainment Tonight, Jezebel, BuzzFeed, it's fun, it's got Kardashians, it's got bling. But, it's like Volodymyr Zelensky, it's like I said Volodymyr instead of Vladimir, I said Vladimir, it's like so close. He's like a pale white guy, he's like a talking head, he's not really sexy. But that's kind of what the real world is. And yeah, so coming back to the through line, there was a lot of unfinished business. And it was bound to come up because it was really needed addressing, it really needed answers. And this idea of kicking the can down the road, or whatever metaphor you choose, like hiding something underneath under the rug, sweeping under the rug, that wasn't going to do, because people can't live their lives in hiding or in denial. And at a certain point, it was going to come back. I guess what surprised us was precisely how it came back and the force with which it came back. And now all the unanswered questions that swirl around it, like where the hell are we now in 2022? Are we forgetting it again, all over again? Kind of why I was thinking about making pictures. And then your second question.
The art reception and how do you see the difference in collecting our artistic community or pure?
So Occupy, there was so much interest, but no sales, no acquisition. Oh no, I have to say, Luke Jordan at the University of Kansas was an early supporter because a representative from the University of Kansas is here today, and he made sure that he wanted some of those images at his home institution, and there were a few places like that, but very, very few. And as the years went on, a few more. Harvard bought a portfolio, Dartmouth bought a portfolio, but the Museum of Modern Art, no. The other museums, no. And part of it might be that people struggle to understand the significance visually, not just politically. Part of it might be, and I'll say this on the record because it's not good news, that the Museum of Modern Art is one of the most corporate museum institutions in the country, and has been for a generation and a half. So as a museum driven by corporate interests that belong to the 1%, becomes difficult subject matter. Now, are the curators directly influenced by that? No, of course not. But their curatorial purview probably doesn't include that as a conscious decision by the overall museum structure. So the curators are less interested in what I'm doing because the museum as an institution is less interested in what I'm doing. Not to say that they haven't collected my work, my more experimental work, yes, thrilled to have it there. And is this a condemnation of the modern? No, of course not. But this is just saying something that's true. And other people have said this too. There have been protests at all the museums. We had protests a biennial ago. The Museum of Modern Art had some protests not too long ago about this conflict. And me saying it doesn't make it better, it doesn't make it worse. But it does ask people to think about those types of decisions they're making. The COVID journal's work had a very warm reception, even the justice work. Though I couldn't send pictures of people weren't in person because we're just getting there now, and maybe that changes. It was all online presentations at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Anderson Ranch in Colorado. Yeah, doing all these great things. People just want to see it. So we'll see that, I mean, and it begs the obvious question, where do we go from there? And I don't have any answers to that. The book, as a project, as an idea, kind of puts that in the foreground. So I've made these images, and I'm kind of asking more or less directly in my essay that we engage the images in a conversation about now and less a reflection about now.
So, Accra is here with his book. We have copies. Would you like to say anything, Josie, on the books?
We do have copies of both Accra and Lynne's books for sales up at the registers. They're all signed. Before we head out, can we give it up for Accra and Lynne one more time?